Alright, so today we're going to be talking about solving inequalities, and then we'll graph them. So here we have, we're going to talk about addition and subtraction problems first. So example 1, we want to solve and graph the inequality. We have x minus 12 is greater than or equal to 8. So we're going to solve this first. These are really straightforward. It's just like how you solve a normal equation. So in a normal equation, when we're solving for x, right, we would add 12 to both sides because we would want to do the opposite operation. We're doing the same thing here. There's just an inequality symbol instead. So plus 12 on both sides. And then we have x is greater than or equal to, and then we just solve and add these, so we would get 20. In this case, right, you would just copy down the same inequality symbol. This would be your final answer. Once you have x by itself, you're done solving. Now that we have x by itself, we can graph the inequality, and this was covered in the last video if you're not sure about how to graph them. But on a number line, we'll just number this here. Okay, and then remember there's two things that you need to do in graphing. First thing is determine if you're using open or closed circle. In this case, because it's the greater than or equal to, this or equal to sign means we need to use the closed circle, right? We're going to fill it in right here. And then it should be going to the right because we want numbers that are greater than 20. So over here are the numbers greater than 20. So I'm going to draw my arrow to the right. And this would be my final answer. This is the solved inequality, and this is my graph. Alright, here is our second problem. I want you to pause the video and try to solve this on your own first. When you're done solving, graph the inequality on a number line. And then when you're done, you can resume the video and watch the answer. Alright, to solve this, just like the previous one, whenever we're solving for a variable, do the opposite operation. So this was plus 8. So we got to do minus 8 on both sides. This cancels out the 8s, so we're just left with p on this side. And then copy down my inequality sign here. 18 minus 8, that gives me 10. So you should have gotten p is less than 10. And then we'll graph this on our number line. When you're graphing on the number line, you can choose whatever numbers as long as you're including the 10. And then this one, again, think about open or closed circle. This is an open circle because this is just the regular less than. Whenever you have the regular less than or greater than symbols, you just use an open circle because we're not including 10 as one of our possible answers. And then all we have to do is draw our arrow. We want numbers less than 10. You can also use the trick where you look at the direction that this sign is pointing, right? It's pointing this way, to the left. So our arrow will also go to the left. So that's also a trick you can use if you prefer to use that method as well. So this would be graphed correctly. Make sure you have open circle and arrow pointing to the left. And this would be our final. So we just finished up how to solve addition and subtraction with inequalities. Those are really easy, very straightforward, just like how we solve equations. This multiplication and division, though, this has a very special rule. So if you need to pause the video to copy this all down, I would suggest you do that. The rule is if you multiply or divide by a negative number on both sides, just negative numbers on both sides, you need to flip the direction of the inequality sign. This is super duper important because if you do not remember to flip the sign, it will totally change your answer. So this is the most important rule and the main thing that you need to look out for whenever you're solving any inequality problems. So let's take a look at an example. Okay, so I have example 3 right here. Solve and graph the inequality negative 7d is less than or equal to 147. So again, just like how we solved equations, to get rid of this negative 7 right here, we want to divide it on both sides. So I would divide negative 7. This process is still the same that we're used to. The one thing that's different is that we need to remember to flip the sign. Why? Because we just divided a negative number on both sides. So any division, any multiplication where it's a negative number that you're dividing or multiplying on both sides, this is when you have to flip the sign. So I divided by -7. All right, let's just write down what I have left right now. D is by itself. Let's solve 147 divided by -7. Okay, we got -21. This is the important part. This previously is this way, right? Is pointing this way. Now you need to flip it so that it's in the opposite direction. So it should be going this way now. So now instead of the less than or equal to, it's now become the greater than or equal to sign. This is the important thing here. I flipped the sign. This would be my final answer now. And I can graph this on my number line, just like the other problems. Okay, so this would be a filled circle. And my arrow would be going this way. Make sure you look at your final answer. Look at the direction of the sign in the final answer after we flip the sign to tell you which way your arrow should be pointing when you're graphing it on the number line. So this would be your final answer right here. It has the filled circle because of the greater than or equal to, and also is pointing to the right. Go ahead and try these practice problems on your own. You can pause the video and try to solve numbers 1, 2, and 3, and then resume the video when you want to see the answers. So for number 1 here, we have 8p is less than or equal to 58. So we would just divide 8 on both sides. Since we're dividing by a positive number, we don't change anything about the sign. This is going to stay the same because it's a positive number that we're dividing. So then you just want to solve what is 58 divided by 8. You could either write your answer as a decimal, so this would be 7.25, or you could also write it as an improper fraction. The simplified fraction would be 29 over 4. So either of these would work. This one would be a little easier to graph when it's in decimal form. If you're looking at number 2, this one, you need to get rid of this -12 to solve for h. So we would divide -12 on both sides. Now that we are dividing by a negative number, right? This is a negative number that we're dividing. Now we need to switch the sign. So this sign, previously pointing to the right, got to point the other direction. And then you just solve whatever this is. 15 divided by -12, if it was a decimal, would be -1.25. Or you could write it as a fraction. You can leave it like this, or simplify it further. And then our last problem right here, number 3, this is a fraction. There's a few different ways that you can solve these. If you want to, you can multiply the denominator on both sides and then divide on both sides. I'm going to use a quicker method, which is to multiply the reciprocal on both sides. So when I'm multiplying the reciprocal, I take this fraction, -2/3, I flip it, so it's 3 over 2, and then make sure to also include that negative sign. If there's a negative sign here, you got to make sure you're multiplying a negative sign as well. So what I'm doing is I'm multiplying the reciprocal, the flipped fraction, -3 over 2, on both sides. Okay, so I do that. Anytime I multiply a reciprocal, I cancel the whole fraction out, because this whole thing will cancel out. So I'm just left with h on this side. But I multiplied a negative number, right? This is a -3 over 2. When I multiply something that's negative, gotta change the direction of my inequality sign, and then I will solve over here. So I'm going to put this 14 over 1, and then when I multiply these numbers right here, you can do 14 times 3, and then you can divide that by 2. 14 times 3 is -42. Divide it by 1 times 2, and then we can further solve this one. -42 divided by 2 should give us -21. So this would be our final answer here for this one. A few more steps because we had to simplify these fractions, but I think that the easiest way when you have fractions is to just flip it and multiply both sides.